Workshop number 9, reporting guidelines and paperwork. There's a fair amount of material here. Mostly we're going to be going through the logging and get into more specifics about exactly how to log correctly. Alright, 2.1, paperwork. So for the most part, those of us who have chosen this line of work probably did not choose it because we enjoy doing paperwork. So we do try to keep the amount of paperwork in this job to a minimum. Having said that, there is a certain amount of paperwork that is essential, and timely and accurate paperwork on your part will help the operations team and the accounting team make sure that all of our reporting is done correctly and in a timely fashion. So we need accurate paperwork to stay on track, and that certainly helps, particularly in the case of our annual CHP inspections, etc. So we do expect that all expedition leaders turn in all of their paperwork from a given tour on the same day. So before you leave our warehouse at the end of a tour, that paperwork should be completed accurately and turned in to the drop box. And so I'll go through what constitutes complete paperwork. Number 1 is your completed accounting expense sheet. Later in the training, we'll show you the actual accounting sheet and show you how to fill it out. It's not that challenging, but you'll see how that's done. Your pickup list, if you print one. Many guides, once they've gotten pretty adept at this, will often work from their phone or their iPad and don't necessarily print out a pickup list. But if you do print out a pickup list, go ahead and turn that in with your paperwork. It's good to have. Number 3, the white original top sheet from your driver's logbook. The driver's logbook, so there are 2 logbooks that you will be filling out for every tour day that you work. There's the driver's log, which is the one with the red lettering that you carry with you. So one of the logbooks tracks the driver's activity and stays with the driver at all times. The other logbook, the vehicle logbook, that's the one with the green lettering, stays with the vehicle and tracks the vehicle at all times. On any given day, you're going to have to fill both of those out. The driver's log, the one with the red lettering, you'll want to keep that filled out and up to date up to the last stop that you made. If you made a short stop, it doesn't matter, but if you made anything more than about a 15-minute stop, you're going to want to log that in your driver's log. And so if you get inspected, they'll be looking at that log and making sure that whatever your last stop was, that you got up to date with that. And that's important because they could fine you if they find that you did not stay up to date. So if you get pulled over or inspected and your logbook hasn't been filled out or hasn't, it's towards the end of the day and you've only filled out up until 10 a.m., they will fine you for that. So try to keep that as up to date as possible. The top sheet, the white sheet from that logbook and the vehicle logbook are what you'll turn in with your paperwork. So there's a top sheet that you turn in with your accounting and your other paperwork. The second sheet, the yellow sheet, the carbon copy, is the one that stays with the book. Number 4 is the white or original of the vehicle logbook, the one with the green lettering. That's the one that stays in the vehicle, and every morning, once you've done your vehicle inspection, you'll want to fill that out, checking off that everything is in good condition and that vehicle is ready to use. You sign off on it, and you'll definitely want to note your mileage. That also needs to be filled out before you leave the warehouse, and again, if you get inspected and that hasn't been done, that's another hefty fine for you. We do ask that with the vehicle logbooks, rather than reporting any vehicle issues, if you're doing your vehicle inspection and you find an issue, a problem, you're going to have to make a call as to, is that something that needs to get reported but is not going to stop me from using this vehicle today. An example of that might be you might see a tear in one of the seat upholsteries of one of the seats, or something like that. But you can go ahead and use that vehicle for the tour. You'll want to, again, you don't want to log it. You want to make sure to send an email to the mechanics@extronomical.com email address. That's how we track all of our vehicle issues. And that's fine, but don't put it in the logbook. On the other hand, if you find an issue with your vehicle during your inspection that would have you nervous about taking that vehicle out on the road, whatever it might be, whether your mic might not work, or you see a fluid leak and you can't figure out the origin of it, then if you feel that vehicle is not usable for that tour, you'll want to get in touch with the manager on duty or the reservations office to see if you can get another vehicle assignment and take a different vehicle. Again, don't log it in the logbook. We want to try to keep those logs as clean as possible. And our internal policy for dealing with vehicle issues is to route them both through the mechanics email, but also if it's a issue that needs attention immediately, a call to the reservations officer manager on duty or a discussion with them about that. Number 5, all receipts. So any expenses you incurred throughout the day, you're going to want to keep your receipts and turn them in with your paperwork. And from those receipts, that's where you'll use that information to complete your accounting expense sheet. There are two sections. One is for personal expenses versus company card expenses. For the most part, we want to make sure that you're using your company card for all your job-related expenses. The standard expenses would be gas for the vehicle, any entry fees to national parks that you paid, any food that you might have purchased if you have a reimbursement available for that tour, any tolls you might have had to pay that were not paid by the fast track, and any other miscellaneous expenses. For the most part, anything you charge to your company card is going to be the standard expenses that we've delineated. On occasion, you might have a situation that requires you to make other purchases. An example is that on hot days, we do have a policy on Yosemite tours, specifically on hot days, that you can buy a case of bottled water to distribute to the bus as an amenity. That's something you don't necessarily need to get approval for, as long as it meets the qualifications, and that's laid out in the manual as well. Other expenses might be one-off things, like you might need a new garbage can, or you might need something else for the vehicle, maybe some engine oil or something that you need on the road. Typically, you're going to want to get approval from the manager on duty before you incur those expenses. And so if you've got an out-of-ordinary miscellaneous expense that you've charged your card, get approval, and then on your accounting expense sheet, you'll write that into there's a section called Other Expenses, and you'll give a little brief explanation and mention that you did get approval from the office for that expense. Number 6, any vehicle repairs. If your vehicle had some issues over the course of the day and you were able to get them repaired, could be at the Yosemite garage, could be something else, any towing fees, that sort of thing, you need to get a receipt and make sure to turn those in if you charge those to your card. Even if you didn't, if they got billed directly to the company, you'll still want to get a receipt and turn it in. Any vouchers. Talked about vouchers before. The vouchers are what you collect from passengers who have booked their reservations through resellers, and they get issued these vouchers. We've talked about when you should or shouldn't collect those vouchers. Typically, you want to get the vouchers if the passengers have them, but if on your pickup list it says that you're supposed to collect your voucher, but that passenger doesn't have it, that's not a reason to not allow them onto the tour. So get the vouchers as much as possible, and if you've got them, turn them in with your paperwork. If a passenger doesn't have a voucher, that's not a reason to not let them on the tour. Number 8, cash and traveler's checks. Traveler's checks are pretty rare these days, but could conceivably happen that someone tries to pay traveler's checks. But you will pretty regularly be requested to collect cash from a passenger. Um, and so if you have collected cash, you need to make sure it's the correct amount. You'll want to, I think we've talked about this earlier in the training, but you want to make sure that it matches up to the amount that you're supposed to collect. You're responsible for collecting the correct amount and turning it in. I tend to like to do that early in the day. I won't necessarily do it before they get seated in the bus, although you can. But what I typically do is, as the passenger is getting on, is if I know that I'm supposed to collect cash from them, I'll mention to them that there is a cash payment that I'm supposed to collect. Just get acknowledgement that they know that, so that if there is any confusion, you can clear it up before you leave town. But then maybe and just let them know that you'll take care of collecting the cash at the first stop. And that's usually what I do, but you can come up with your own strategy for that. Just make sure that you do it and that you don't forget, because you'll be held accountable if you don't get cash. There are also some unusual scenarios where, when a passenger is listed as someone from whom you need to collect cash, in some instances they might not be aware of it. I can't remember if we've addressed this scenario in the past part of the training, but I'll address it again. An example might be a passenger booked the tour through their hotel concierge. The concierge collected the deposit, which is the money that they keep. That secured the reservation. That reservation, once booked, enters into our system listed as a cash collection. But in fact, the passenger may not realize that it's a cash collect, and they may have provided their credit card to the concierge, who didn't give that information to us. So on occasion, you'll have something listed as a cash collection, but that passenger may actually still want to pay by credit card, or may be a little bit confused, and you just want to clarify. If they do want to use a credit card, you can take a credit card. And so when you get maybe to your first stop, get their credit card from them. You can actually the preferred method of this is to call into the reservations office, pass your phone to the passenger, who can then give let the reservationist know that you've got a passenger on your vehicle who wants to pay their balance by credit card. That reservationist will then talk to the passenger, collect their credit card information, run the payment, confirm the payment, and then you can scratch that collection off your list. And that's cash you wouldn't need to turn in at the end of the day. Number 9, completed monthly logbooks. So what we do with the driver's logbooks, the ones with the red lettering, is that we have each driver use one book per month. So at the end of every month, even if you haven't filled out all the pages, you're going to grab a new book, and typically those books can be found down in the driver's desk area at the warehouse if you need a new one. And so at the end of the month, you'll stop using that book, you'll grab a new one, you'll start a new one, but when you get inspected or stopped and the officer wants to check your logs, they're going to be checking, typically going back 8 days. They usually will not check beyond 8 days, but you always need to be carrying evidence of your driving activity going back at least 8 days, or at most 8 days, I should say. So if you've started a new logbook, you're going to want to make sure you have the previous month's logbook for those first 8 days, at which point then you can turn it into the operations department. And that way you're always going to have a record of those last 8 days. Number 10, any other documentation that you might have collected over the course of your tour that the reservations office needs. There are any number of scenarios where this might occur. The most obvious one that comes to my mind is sometimes the reservations office or manager on duty will ask you to purchase a case of wine from one of the wineries. We often use those bottles of wine as gifts for concierge or even passengers. And so we like to have a certain amount of wine stocked in our warehouse. And so if you were requested to buy a case of wine, that might require you to use your your company credit card for that purchase. You'll want to get a receipt, report that on the accounting expense sheet in the section that says other, and just in addition to what you spent the money on and the amount, you'll make a little note that the reservations office had requested that you make that purchase, and you had approval for it. take all that paperwork, wrap it all up, fold it all up, any cash you have or traveler's checks, place that inside that paperwork. All of that goes into an envelope that you can find down in the driver's desk area. Once that you've got that envelope filled with all your paperwork and cash, if you have any, pop that into the box that's on the wall there, and that'll get collected by the accounting department. All right, tour pickup lists. We've already kind of talked about this. Again, if you've printed a pickup list, you want to turn that in, but you don't necessarily. Not everybody prints them, but and we've discussed pickup lists a little bit earlier in the training, but your pickup list has a lot of valuable information on it. You will have wanted to review it the day or afternoon, evening before your tour. Good analysis of a tour pickup list in advance can help you proactively spot potential issues, or you can find some ways sometimes to improve your pickup schedule. So having a look at your pickup list, making sure that all the information on there makes sense, and looking it over to see that no changes are necessary is going to help you out. The most valuable information that you'll find on your pickup list, of course, is who you're picking up, where you're picking them up, when you're picking them up, etc., and hopefully their contact information. There's also notification of at the top. Of course, you're gonna have your basics, which tour it is, the date, what else is on there, the total number of passengers you have going. There's also a section that indicates if you've got cash to collect and how much. So make sure there's also in the list of passengers towards the right, there's a section for driver's notes, and there's another driver's notes section at the top. It's in these driver's notes fields that you're going to find important information. So always when you're scanning your pickup list, make sure to pay attention to all the notes, because that's generally directed at you, the driver, and there can be some valuable information in there. There's also the collect column, which will tell you how much you need to collect, etc. And we've already kind of talked about when a reservation is listed as collecting cash, there are some scenarios where that might not exactly be the case. Most of the time, those people will know that they need to pay you some cash and will know how much, but on occasion either they may not know how much, or they may not even realize that they're supposed to pay cash. They thought that it was all taken care of. But so anyway, expect that there from time to time there could be a little bit of confusion, and so you just need to sort of clarify things and clear up the confusion, and if necessary, collect that cash, or even, as I've described earlier, get a credit card, or get them to provide their credit card information to the reservations office. We've talked about vouchers. I won't talk about that again. In the driver's notes, the most important information can be all sorts of different things. There might be some pickup instructions that are important that'll help you find someone. It'll let you know if those passengers signed up for the audio tours, the MP3 players, so you know that you need those and who those are going to. Could potentially be a bottle of wine that we want to give a passenger for various reasons. That bottle of wine's not for you. Sometimes they may be on their honeymoon or whatever. There's a number of different reasons. Could be that they have a lost and found item that was left on a previous tour, and now this is another tour. We might want to get it back to them. So there's a number of different types of information that you might find in there, and it's all going to be important and valuable to you. So make sure to pay attention to that. Logbook page and vehicle inspection report. And just as a point of clarification, the official name for the driver's logbook, the one with the red lettering, is the driver's daily log. Again, that tracks the driver's activity and stays with the driver. And then there's the vehicle inspection logbook. That's the one with the green lettering, and that's the one that stays with the vehicle and tracks the vehicle activity. And so in order to comply with CHP requirements, we need to stay up to date with our logs. I've already mentioned this before, but it's crucial that that all be up to date in your driver's log, in the daily inspection, the vehicle inspection log, etc. And you can get inspected out on the road. We here at the warehouse, we get an annual inspection, and we can also be spot inspected randomly. And we always need to have our paperwork up to date. And our ability to have our paperwork up to date relies on you as the driver or the expedition leader accurately, correctly filling out all your paperwork and turning it in on a timely basis. And that's what's going to allow us to stay in compliance and stay up to speed with that. All right. This is redundant. I kind of went a little bit out of order. I've already talked about tour pickup lists, so we've already kind of covered that. Going back to the logbooks and vehicle inspection report, just to kind of reiterate in a little bit more detail, you as a driver can be inspected at any time. There are some times of the year and places that we most often have our inspections. Up in Yosemite, at the lodge, typically late spring, early summer, they'll set up an inspection point, and then in Muir Woods, oftentimes later in summer or early fall. But there's no guarantee that that's when it's going to happen. It can happen at any time. The CHP and the Park Service do spot inspections, so you really need to be diligent about staying on top of your logging, vehicle logs and driver's logs. And the fines can be pretty steep if you're found to be in violation, which simply means that your logbook is not up to date. Or if they find an error in the way you logged, the fines can be up to $600–700. Depends on what they fine you for. And that's your expense. So keep that in mind. We're going to talk more in this training about how to log correctly. So logging correctly is what's going to keep you in compliance and prevent you from getting fined if you were to get stopped and inspected. Here are a few reminders of the regulations we need to follow when driving and filling out our driver's logs. On duty, not driving, plus driving hours must not exceed 15 total hours. Driving must not exceed 10 hours. So the most important thing you need to remember about your driver's logs and your driving activity in general is the 10-15 rule. Remember that, 10-15. You can't be driving for more than 10 hours, and your log needs to reflect that you have not been driving more than 10 hours in a day. And you can't be on duty, which includes driving plus on duty but not driving, for more than 15 hours. And your logbook needs to reflect that. So that's the 10-15 rule. 10 hours driving, don't exceed 10 hours driving, don't exceed 15 hours of total on-duty time, including on-duty not driving and driving. Also, in a consecutive 8-day period, you cannot be on duty for more than 70 hours. So that cumulative total of day after day on duty not driving plus driving hours, on a daily basis that needs to stay under 15, and in a consecutive 8-day period that number cannot go over 70. So you have to be keeping an eye on that. And typically the way we schedule, we generally schedule in such a way that that wouldn't happen. But at the end of the day, it's your responsibility as the driver to make sure that you're not getting out of compliance or into a potential violation. So you must have the past 8 consecutive days completed in your logbook, in your vehicle. You need to do pages for your days off. So there'll be a sample in the index, and we'll go through that. But anytime you're not driving, if you've got a day off or a couple of days off, you're going to want to log that in your logbook. If you've got multiple days off in a row, you don't need a page for each day. But if you were away from work for a day or more, that needs to show in your logbook with one page. And so you always need to have the last 8 days accurately completed so that if you do get randomly inspected, they can check that record. In the driver's log, remember to fill out all the fields and put a line through those that are blank. The CHP, when they inspect you, they are sticklers for detail, and they have very specific requirements. And so as we train you to log correctly, it's really important. Can't stress how important it is for you as a driver to stay in compliance, and for us as a company to stay in compliance, to learn to log correctly. And that's a pretty precise science, which we're going to talk more and more about in the continuing training here. All right, so this is an example of a Yosemite tour schedule, and this is how you would fill out your driver's vehicle inspection report, the DVIR, which is the book with the logbook with the green lettering that remains with the vehicle. Typically, in the vehicles, we keep them either in the side pocket, driver's side door pocket, or just up on the dash. So you should be able to find it. If it so happens that there isn't a book in there, or the one that's in there is at its last page, you should be able to go over to the driver's desk, and there should be a case of new ones. So just grab a new one for the vehicle, and we also try to keep an extra in the vehicle binder as a backup, just in case. So prior to any pickups, the bus driver's vehicle inspection report must be filled out completely. So you need to do this before you leave the warehouse. Please press down hard so the second page is dark enough to read. And so you'll fill in the company name, Astronomical Tours, the bus number, the vehicle number that refers to van or bus, and you'll get to know our numbering system and which vehicle. You'll know every vehicle within a few days of working, or a few weeks of working with us. So you put in the vehicle number, the odometer reading, so that's the mileage listed on the vehicle at the time of the morning inspection, your start mileage, which is the same as the start mileage. Those are always going to be identical. The date, the time, in this case 5:30 a.m. for Yosemite tours, typically around when you're going to be inspecting your vehicle before you head out. So that's the on-duty timing of the morning inspection. And your location. It's always going to be, for the most part, it's always going to be San Francisco, California. So you need to spell out San Francisco. Don't put an abbreviation. Don't write SF or San Fran or Frisco or anything like that. It needs to say San Francisco and then comma CA for California. Again, the CHP does not like abbreviations. In the Inspect Items Listed section, you'll see that there's this long 2-row list of the different items that you've inspected on the vehicle. Anything that doesn't apply to your vehicle, you can just draw a line through and leave the checkbox blank. Examples of that are stop arm control and stop arm and clutch and wheelchair lift. Most of our vehicles do not have any of these things. The exception is that one of our luxury vans is a handicapped accessible with a wheelchair lift. But none of our vehicles have the stop arm. Those are usually on school buses. All of our buses have automatic transmissions, so they typically won't have a clutch, as of now anyway. So you can put a line through those items that don't apply. All the other items, you want to put an X or a check mark to indicate that you've inspected those items. And we've already talked about this, but if through the course of your inspection you found anything you need to report, where it says remarks, leave that blank. We've talked about this before. We want to keep those logs clean. So don't actually report any issues in the logbook. Report them in the appropriate manner as per the company policy, which is to say, send an email to the mechanics at Extronomical email address, and also if it's a serious issue that requires immediate attention, put a call in to the reservations office or the manager on duty to address that issue that needs attention. And if you need to have a new vehicle assigned, they can work on that for you. And then once you've filled out your inspection report, assuming all is good, you're going to put an X or check in the satisfactory box, and you're going to sign. And that all needs to be done before you start your tour. The driver's daily log, which is the logbook again with the red lettering that you carry with you as driver and you should have with you at all times, that you'll want to begin to fill it out before you leave the warehouse, as well as the vehicle inspection log. So you'll want to have the date, vehicle number, all the information at the top filled out before you leave. Then once you begin your tour, once you have your first significant stop, you'll want to begin to update your log. And what I mean by significant is that as you're doing your pickups in the city, you don't have to log those. But for instance, if you're on a Yosemite tour, the first time you'd begin to actually track your timing would be once you make that Central Valley stop, that first extended stop. And so at that point you'd want to log up to that point, and then over the course of the day, every single time you have, again, what I call a significant stop, which is anything over 15 minutes, that's when you're going to want to, each time you're going to want to get up to date up to that point, so that if you were to get inspected, the inspector, officer, whatever, has a look and can see that if you're being inspected at the Yosemite Lodge and they see that you logged right up to your last stop at Sentinel Bridge, then they know that you're in compliance. Whereas if they see that your last log entry was in Oakdale, they're going to be able to figure out that, well, you probably made stops since Oakdale. So that's kind of generally how you want to do it. So in the driver's daily log, similar to in the vehicle log, you're going to put in the date, fill in the month, day, and year, the vehicle number, your signature in full, the name of the carrier. So this is all pretty similar. There's a section that says name of co-driver. You're not likely to have a co-driver, though there are instances where if there are two drivers on board, the most common instance of this would be in a training scenario. The trainer would still, if you're the trainer, or if you're a tour guide who's riding along on a tour, you're still going to want to fill out a log, because that's still on-duty time, even though it's not driving time. You'd log a little differently, because the way your log would reflect your time as on-duty but not driving basically the whole day, since you're not driving the whole day. So that's true if you are the person doing the training, you're the actual trainer, or if you're the trainee and you've already been hired and you're being trained for a new tour, and so you're riding along on that tour, you would log those hours in your logbook, but they would all be on duty, not driving. Outside of that scenario, you're not going to have a co-driver. The main office address, 928 Harrison Street in San Francisco, zip code 94107. Not that you don't need to put the zip code in the log. The zip code is just important to remember, because your company credit card, and this is a little off topic, but your company credit card, when you use it, particularly at the gas stations, the verification is going to be, they're going to ask you to put in the zip code. And so 94107 is a number you're going to want to burn into your brain. That's the number you'll quickly understand is the one you use to validate your credit card at gas stations, etc. That was a little bit off topic, sorry. So our address, 928 Harrison Street, San Francisco. Again, do not do any abbreviations. Spell out street and the San Francisco, and then put CA for California. Home terminal address is the same, so you don't actually need to fill that out. fill in the time grid and keep up to date throughout your tour. I've already kind of talked about this, but every time you have a significant stop, and again, definition of significant stop is 15 minutes or more, you must log each and every time period that you stop. And we'll go over this more in detail later in terms of how to properly log the time. So on this slide, we've got, this is page 32 in the handbook. We've got a typical Yosemite grid. So this kind of gives you, on an ideal day, the schedule that you would keep and the places that you would go on your Yosemite tour. Keep in mind that things do change. This particular schedule is the route we take along Highway 120 during the warmer months. We do have an alternate route for winter weather when Highway 120 closes, and we take Highway 140 into the park from the southwest rather than Highway 120, which goes in from the northwest. But anyway, so this is a typical schedule, and we'll go through it. You would typically arrive at our warehouse at about 5:15 a.m. or so. Begin inspecting your vehicle, the vehicle you've been assigned to for that tour, and hopefully complete that inspection with plenty of time to get out the door and get to your first pickup. Our expectation at Xtronomical is that you have arrived to our warehouse no later than 30 minutes before your first pickup is scheduled. So if your very first pickup is at 5:50 a.m., which is often the case, we would expect you to be driving into the warehouse no later than 5:20. And I believe it's been mentioned in this training previously, but it bears mentioning again. Punctuality is a huge issue in this job. We expect expedition leaders to be punctual, and that's important because obviously our passengers are relying on you to be on time, and if you're not on time early in the day, that can certainly throw off the whole day. Gives you a bad start to the day, gives the passengers a bad start, but there's also a lot of ripple effects. So remember that if you're late to begin your tour, there's a lot of people that aren't going to be happy, including passengers who will then call our reservation staff and often give them an earful. So understand the repercussions of your actions, and just remember that punctuality is very, very important on this job. So 5:30 to 6 vehicle inspection. We actually do our pickups a little bit earlier these days, and so oftentimes you'd be starting your inspection about 5:20, and then you'd be rolling out the door of the warehouse headed to your first pickup around 5:40 or so, depending on where it is. From 6 to 7 a.m. you'd be traveling around San Francisco to the various pickup zones, picking up your passengers at their hotels and pickup spots. Typically, ideally, you're leaving San Francisco heading across the Bay Bridge at about 7 o'clock. And that takes about an hour and a half, arriving into Oakdale at about 8:30. From 8:30 to 9, you'd have a break typically, and you'd gas up your vehicle. Passengers would take a break, get some food, stretch their legs, use the restrooms, whatever they need at the Rayleigh's Market in Oakdale, the Oakdale Market. From 9 to 11 then, you'd head up into the mountains towards the park. By about 11, you would have crossed into the park and arrived at Crane Flat, which is the location of the Tuolumne Grove, where we do the hike to the giant sequoia trees. And for logging purposes, we call that Crane Flat. We don't want to refer to it as Yosemite. We refer to it as Crane Flat, so very specific. From 11 to 12:30 approximately, your passengers would be doing the hike to see the giant sequoias at the Tuolumne Grove, assuming the hike is available, assuming it's not off season or that sort of thing. Then from 12:30 to 2, once you leave the Tuolumne Grove, you'd head down into the valley, and for about an hour and a half, you'd be driving to the valley and making several photo stops throughout the valley. Then at approximately 2 o'clock, you'd be arriving at the Yosemite Lodge. That would be your lunch break. Your passengers would have an hour to an hour and a half on their own to do with what they like, whether it's to eat lunch, go for a hike, etc. 3:30, generally you'd be picking up your passengers, heading out of Yosemite on your way back to Oakdale, same route on the way back, reverse. Getting into Oakdale approximately 5 o'clock, another 30-minute break while you gas up, 5:30 to 7:30 heading back to San Francisco, 7:30 to 8:30 doing your drop-offs in San Francisco, 8:30 to 9 back to our warehouse and doing your post-trip inspection, cleaning out your vehicle, and completing all your paperwork before you head home. That would be kind of an ideal schedule, a typical schedule. It's not an exact science. Obviously, there's potential for lots of variability in this, but that's kind of a general guideline for what you're targeting. And if you go through this, in terms of logging, on this grid you'll see the log as column here. 30 minutes logged for the vehicle inspection at the warehouse. In the 6 to 7 segment, you're going to sort of average it out. You don't need to be logging every single hotel that you go to. What you're expressing on your log entry is that for this hour, I was driving and picking people up. An average of 30 minutes of that hour, was spent behind the wheel, and an average of 30 minutes of that hour was spent not behind the wheel. Then the hour and a half from 7 to 8:30 would just be logged as driving time. The 8:30 to 9 at the Oakdale break would be on duty, not driving. The driving section from 9 to 11 going into the park would simply be listed as driving. The 11 to 12:30 during the hike would be considered for logging purposes an hour and a half of off-duty time. So that's not on duty, not driving, that's off-duty, the top section. 12:30 to 2 as you're doing your trip down into Yosemite Valley. Again, kind of like your pickups, you're averaging things out. So you're saying within that hour and a half, I spent approximately 30 minutes behind the wheel, approximately 30 minutes on duty not driving, and approximately 30 minutes driving again. So you're just kind of doing an average. It doesn't have to be an exact replication of what you actually drove. From 2 to 3:30, lunch at the Yosemite Lodge would be logged as an hour and a half of off-duty time. From 3:30 to 5, driving. 5 to 5:30, on duty not driving. 5:30 to 7:30, driving back to San Francisco, that's logged as driving. 7:30 to 8:30, your drop-off, similar to your pickups. You're going to break it down, 30 minutes driving, 30 minutes on duty not driving. And then finally, 8:30 to 9 o'clock was on duty not driving while you do your post-trip inspection and paperwork. And that's pretty standard timing for a Yosemite tour. Remember that on the Yosemite tour specifically, if you don't log properly, you could conceivably get yourself into violation. If you stick to our schedule, you should be well within the 10-15 rule, meaning you shouldn't be behind the wheel more than 10 hours, and you shouldn't be on duty more than 15 hours. But if you don't log correctly, it's very easy to not meet those requirements, and so pay attention to that. And that time that's logged as off-duty, the time during the hike at the Giant Sequoias, and then again the time on your lunch break at the Yosemite Lodge, that doesn't count towards that 10 to 15 rule, so that's important to have in there. So continuing with what we were working on for that same Yosemite tour in the driver's daily log, once you've logged everything, you've got to total up your time, and based on that log entry that we just went through, over to the right of your log page, the off-duty total from line 1 would be 11.5 hours. The driving total from line 3 would be 9 hours. The on-duty not driving, line 4, would be 3.5 hours, for a total of 24 hours. And that keeps you well sort of within compliance based on the 10-15 rule and the driving requirements. The section 2 is the sleeper berth, which we never use, so you're never going to use that. And then off to the far right, there's a recap section, and that's where you're going to put your total on-duty hours, which is the combination of lines 3 and 4. So 9 plus 3.5 equals 12.5. That's what goes up there. If you've done this, you've completed your log entries. If we go over these limits set by the law, again the 10-15 rule, it's not only unsafe, but both you and Xtronomical could be fined by the CHP. And Xtronomical not only could be fined, but we could potentially be suspended. We could have our license revoked. So pretty important, keep that in mind and learn to log correctly. And if ever you have questions about the correctness of your logging or unusual circumstances that do sometimes come up with regards to logging, don't hesitate to call in to the operations team and get your answer so that you're logging correctly. Thanks. So one thing I forgot to mention on the previous slide is that there is an exception to the 10-15 rule. And what that is you get an additional 2 hours of drive time that is granted specifically for unforeseen accidents or acts of God. So like a rock slide or something. That's an unusual exception that you can employ under those circumstances, and you'd only want to do that with permission from the operations manager. So now we've got a series of sample log entries and expense sheets, etc., so you can actually get a visual and see what we've been going through on the last few slides. This first one is the bus driver's vehicle inspection report. And so you can see at the top, you just write in the name of the company, Xtronomical Tours. You've got your odometer reading. That's your start mileage. So start mileage and odometer reading are always the same. Still not sure why they've got that in that way, why they've got it twice, but anyway. Then, of course, the end mileage. So at the beginning of the day, you'd be filling in everything. Of course, you wouldn't have your end mileage, so that would remain blank, but your odometer reading / start mileage would be filled in. You also, of course, wouldn't have your total mileage till the end of the day, but you would fill in the bus number, in this case bus 1620, the date, in this case 15th of May 2013. The time is always the time you arrived at the warehouse, so in this case 5:30 a.m. And the location, San Francisco, California. Remember, no abbreviations, so you can't write SF or Frisco or anything like that. It's got to be San Francisco written out, and then you can abbreviate the state, California. So you want to log exactly as you're seeing here. And then next you've got inspect items listed, if defective, number, and describe in remarks. So going through, the first thing you do, and this becomes pretty routine, the things that don't apply to our vehicles you're going to cross out. So in this case, the stop arm control to the left, and in the right column you've got another stop arm school bus, so scratch that one out as well. The exhaust system, sorry, not the exhaust system, that we of course do have in our vehicles. The next one down would be the clutch. All of our vehicles have automatic transmissions. And then all but one of our current vehicles do not have wheelchair lifts, so you'd cross that one out. If you were inspecting that one van, which is the current handicapped accessible van that we have, is van number 1418, then you would actually not cross out the wheelchair lift and show it as inspected. Once you've done your inspection, you'd check that each of these items has been checked. Though this example shows an X at the first one, fluid leaks, and then a line all the way through, we have found out subsequently, since this was created, that truly to be in compliance with regulation, you want to have an individual check or X mark on each of these items. So you check fluid, you check loose wires, you check belts, on and on. And same over to the right. Once that's done, again, with the remarks, we want to pretty much keep the remarks section clear as much as possible. And so if, as we've talked about previously when you're doing your inspection, if you come across issues, we have an alternate method of reporting issues that doesn't rely on this inspection report. And so follow those procedures rather than marking anything down on this report. Assuming it's all satisfactory, you're going to check or X satisfactory, and you're going to sign your name and get on with your tour. And so all of that needs to be done before you leave to start your pickups. The two areas that will remain blank until the end of the day are the end mileage, of course, and then the total mileage, which you'll fill in at the end of your day. And at the end, when you're filling out your paperwork and you've completed this report, you've added your end mileage and total mileage, then the top copy, the white copy, is what gets ripped out of the book and included with your paperwork, and the yellow back copy, the carbon copy, remains in the book with the vehicle. On this next slide, we have a sample driver's daily log sheet. So now we're in the driver's log book, the one with the red lettering that you carry with you as a driver. The previous slide, we were showing an example of the vehicle log that stays with the vehicle. So this is for the same tour, same day, and this shows you very specifically how you would log the example that we've used previously. Starting with the date at the top, 5/15/2013. Extronomical Tours is the name of the carrier. 928 Harrison Street, San Francisco, again written all the way out, CA for California, no abbreviations. Home terminal address is the same, so you don't actually have to fill anything out, you just put a little arrow. And you can put a line through co-driver's name, because you don't have a co-driver, typically. And the signature generally is going to happen at the end of the day, because you're signing to certify that what you've put on this log is in fact true, and so you'd want to sign it at the very end of the day when you're done. Over here we've got total miles driving today and then total mileage today. There's a little bit of confusion here. Almost always that's just going to be the same number. What that relates to is if there were two drivers in the vehicle. One is the number of miles the driver drove, and one is the number of miles that the vehicle was driven. Total mileage is the vehicle was driven that far. Total miles driving today is the number of miles you drove. Almost always that's going to be the same. The rare occasion where that wouldn't be the same is if you have a trainer on board and if they do a part of the driving, or if you get rescued and you share the driving responsibilities, you would break that down a little bit. But 99% of the time, these two numbers are going to be the same, in this case 420 miles. Below that is your vehicle number, B1620. Our convention for vehicle numbers is that if it's a van, it starts with a V and then the number, and if it's a bus, it starts with a B and then a number. Getting down into the actual log area, you've got off to the left here your off-duty time, number 1, your sleeper berth time, number 2, which we never use, your driving time, number 3, and your on-duty not driving time, number 4. So for this particular tour, you're going to start by logging from midnight to the time that you arrived at the warehouse as off-duty, because of course you weren't working. So typically you'd be arriving into the warehouse approximately 5:30, so that's where that starts. You drop down and make a line to on-duty not driving, because from the second you start duty, you're not driving yet. You're in the warehouse doing your inspection, etc., prepping your vehicles, all that. So that's represented down here in number 4, on-duty not driving. Got a 30 minutes there. This obviously works in 15-minute increments, and so anything under 15 minutes, you're typically not logging. From 6 o'clock to 6:30, you've now jumped up and you're essentially saying within the hours of 6 to 7, as we've already talked about, you're logging 30 minutes of those as drive time behind the wheel, and then down another 30 minutes as on duty not driving, and that would sort of average out the time that you're actually behind the wheel versus the time you're out of the bus, getting your passengers at their hotels, etc. Then at 7 o'clock, you've got all your passengers. You've called into our reservations office to confirm that you've got all your passengers. You've given them the head count, and they've given you the go-ahead to leave town and start your tour. So you're heading out, crossing the Bay Bridge, and you're driving for an hour and a half from 7 to 8:30 on your way to Oakdale. That's represented here in number 3, driving time. You get to Oakdale at 8:30, and now you're dropping down back into the on-duty not driving. This reflects that you're still working, you're still potentially gassing up. This is work related, and so while you're not behind the wheel, you are still on duty. Got 30 minutes there. Back up, and once you depart Oakdale, you've got your passengers on board. You're driving again from 9 to 11 on your way to the park, obviously represented as drive time. And then here at 11, now you're jumping up to the off-duty, because now you've arrived at Crane Flat in the Tuolumne Grove. You've presumably told your passengers everything they need to know to successfully complete the hike down to see the giant sequoia trees. They're off on their way, and now you're taking a nice break and doing whatever you want to do, relaxing, taking a nap, etc. So that's actually off-duty time. You're not working there. Your passengers come back, you get everybody on board. At 12:30 you're heading out to head down into the valley, so now you're dropping back down from off-duty into the driving area. And you've got 30 minutes behind the wheel to get you down to the valley. And now from 1 to 2:30 you're representing that time as part of it being behind the wheel, part of it being on duty not driving, where perhaps you're at one of the photo stops taking pictures of your passengers, so you're still technically sort of working. And then another half an hour back behind the wheel. And so that's, again, like with the pickups and drop-offs, it's an average. You're saying for this period of time from 12:30 to 2, I was driving and out of the vehicle, and about an hour of that was behind the wheel, and about a half an hour of that was on duty but not driving. At 2 o'clock, you've presumably completed all your photo stops, and now you're at your lunch stop at the lodge. So you come up here, and your passengers are off taking their lunch break, and you are off duty. You're not working, again, doing whatever you want to do from 2 to 3:30, at which point you're heading back, picking up your passengers, and dropping down. And so from 3:30 to 5 o'clock, you're driving behind the wheel, back to Oakdale at 5 o'clock for a half an hour, on duty not driving, and then from 5:30 to 7:30, that's the drive from Oakdale back to San Francisco. From 7:30 to 8:30, you're splitting that time again, averaging now about 30 minutes behind the wheel, 30 minutes on duty not driving while you do your drop-offs. And then at 8:30, you're heading back and you're in the warehouse. Now you've got 30 minutes of off-duty time, on duty not driving time, where you're doing your post-trip inspection, doing your paperwork, cleaning out your vehicle. And then 9 o'clock, you are done and off duty again, and so from 9 o'clock till midnight, that's represented off duty. You come up with your total hours over here, so you're going to, the 11.5 is a total of the 5.5 hours from midnight to 5:30, an additional hour and a half from 11 to 12:30, so that's 6.5 hours. Then from 2 to 3:30, another hour and a half, that's 8 hours. That's 8.5 hours. And then from 9 to 11, you've got 3 more hours, totaling 11.5. Your driving time, once you add up the 6 to 6:30, the 7 to 8:30, the 9 to 11, the 12:30 to 1, the 1:30 to 2, the 3:30 to 5, the 5:30 to 7:30, and the 8 to 8:30, that's lined up here as driving time, that totals out at 9 hours. Then you finish off by totaling up your on-duty not driving time, which here starts at 5:30, 30 minutes, From 6:30 to 7, another 30 minutes. From 8:30 to 9 while you're in Oakdale, another 30 minutes. From 1 to 2:30, another 30 minutes. From 5 to 5:30, additional 30 minutes. 7:30 to 8, and 8:30 to 9, for a total of 3.5 hours on duty not driving. You total all three of these numbers up, and that comes out to 24 hours, the number of hours in the day. And then don't forget to head up to the recap section in the top right corner here, and this 12.5 number is the total of on-duty hours. That's the number that cannot go over 15, and it's the total of number 3, driving, 9 hours, and number 4, on duty, 3.5 hours. So number 3, driving, can never exceed 10 hours, and the total on duty, combination of number 3 and number 4, which is reflected up here in the recap, cannot go over 15 hours. And barring any odd circumstances, and if you're logging accurately and correctly, you shouldn't really ever have to go over those limits. As we move down below the remarks here, you always want to add up your passenger count. In this particular day, the total number of passengers was 30. Some days you will have a different number of passengers on your way up to Yosemite versus on your way back, and so you can just do two numbers. Or, alternatively, you can just do the higher of the two numbers if you want. That's okay too. But there always has to be an accurate passenger count. Then, to the right of that, you are, and this is important to the logging process as well, you're giving a description of where you were during these time periods. And so you can see how it's done here. And you can group things together. So these 2 half-an-hour segments and that were on duty not driving at the warehouse during your inspection and your preparation, and then while you're doing your pickups, that whole hour and a half was in San Francisco, and so you can bunch it all together as it is done here. It's just right in San Francisco, California. Then your next stop was Oakdale. You can see how that was laid out here. Up here in Crane Flat from 11 to 12:30. Again, you're writing Crane Flat, you're not writing Yosemite. We actually had one driver who wrote this as Yosemite, got inspected, and they fined her for suggesting that she was in Yosemite. And so it's a little bit confusing, but you want to refer to the Tuolumne Grove as Crane Flat, which creates separation from actually Yosemite Valley. Then you can see that the time in Yosemite, even though where it's logged with the lines above jumps around between off-duty driving and on-duty not driving, you can group it all together as is done here as all within Yosemite. And then you got your half an hour in Oakdale on your way back, and your time in San Francisco behind the wheel and on duty not driving as you're doing your drop-offs and doing your post-trip inspection and end-of-day procedures. Then finally down here at the bottom, from San Francisco, California to Yosemite, California. You want to be precise here. Again, no abbreviations except for the state. And so your from is essentially always going to be San Francisco. Your to is really the most distant destination you got to in the day. And one thing we've learned as well over time is that the names of places that you're using, both in the from and to sections here, San Francisco and Yosemite, and here up above it where you are making notes on where you were at a given time during the day, where you have San Francisco, then you have Oakdale, then you have Crane Flat, then you have Yosemite, then you have Oakdale, then you have San Francisco. Those have to be the names of actual towns, essentially, places that have a post office box. So for instance, Yosemite is considered a town, as is Crane Flat, and so those are legitimate entries. An example of something that wouldn't work, for example, on a wine country tour, if you were to put Carneros is not a town, it's a wine region. Or if you were to put Muir Woods, whereas Yosemite National Park has a post office, so it's officially a town. Muir Woods is not, and so it's probably okay actually to put Muir Woods there, but Technically, you'd want to put Mill Valley, California. So that's a little bit of a technicality. I'm not entirely sure just how important that is, but can't hurt to err on the side of caution and make sure that what you're putting in these fields is actually a legitimate town. On this next slide, we're going to go through the same exercise, this time for a Muir Woods and Wine Country tour, just so you can see the difference in the two. On the bus driver's vehicle inspection report that you see on this slide, it's really no different. You're following pretty much the same procedures as we went through for the Yosemite tour, so I won't spend any time on this. But here's yet another example of a correctly done vehicle inspection report. Remembering that this gets done, everything on this gets done with the exception of the end mileage and the total mileage prior to leaving the warehouse to start your tour. Other thing to remember, just a reiteration, is that we had found out subsequently, since this example was put in place, that you don't want to do an X and then a line through the sections that you've checked. I'm talking about the vertical line. So you're still going to cross out the items that don't apply, like the stop arm control and the clutch and the wheelchair lift. But you're going to put an X or a check mark in each independent section that you've checked. That's the correct way to do it to be compliant. So, and then again, check satisfactory at the bottom or exit, and sign your name. Turn it in with your paperwork at the end of the tour once you've completed the end mileage and total mileage. And then you take the total mileage from this report, and that is what gets transferred into your driver's log as the total mileage for that report. So we're going to move on to the next slide. So on this driver's daily log, which is for a typical Muir Woods and Wine Country tour, again, the same format and principle as for the Yosemite tour, although the timeline is going to be very different. But we'll just kind of go through it again just for repetition's sake. You've got the date at the top. Astronomical Tours is the name of the carrier. Our address, 928 Harrison Street, San Francisco, California. You don't need the zip code in here, but just as a reminder, the zip code for the warehouse, which is the one you'll enter when you're using your credit card to get gas, is 94107. And then you can do a little arrow because the home terminal address is the same as the main office address. Your signature is done at the end of the day, identifying that everything here is accurate and correct. Little line through the co-driver's name. Total miles driving will be the number that gets transferred at the end of your tour from the vehicle report. And again, total miles driving, total mileage today are the same unless those unusual circumstances that we discussed previously occur. Your vehicle number, in this case bus 913, and then in this case your off-duty time right up until 7:30. That's when you typically arrive at the warehouse. Then on duty for a half an hour while you're prepping your vehicle. Then a half an hour of driving time, and so from 7:30 to 8:30 you've got first half an hour listed as drive time, the second half an hour listed as on duty not driving. And so that's, again, you're just averaging the time you spent in the vehicle as opposed to behind the wheel, as opposed to in the vehicle or out of the vehicle while you're doing your pickups. By 8:30 you're headed out of town. It takes about an hour to get over to Muir Woods, and an hour in Muir Woods, which is off-duty time, and then another hour of driving time to get up to Sonoma. An hour, 45 minutes there at that first winery. This particular example is old, when we used to still go to Gloria Ferrer, and you'll note that on the wine country tours we like to have the name of the winery that you're visiting. That's not required, that's just for our company internal purposes, but so we do put that in parentheses. And then you've got a 15-minute drive, that's drive time over to Sonoma Square, You've got an hour and a half on Sonoma Square, that's off-duty time and your lunch break. And then 15 minutes of drive time to get over to the Napa Winery, which is Madonna. 45 minutes there is on-duty, not driving. 30 minutes drive time to get over to the third winery, which is Klein. An hour at Klein from 3:30 to 4:30, which is on-duty, not driving. And then an hour of drive time heading back to San Francisco, and then breaking down your drive time and on-duty not driving time for doing your drop-offs. And that on-duty not driving incorporates what little time you might take to do a Golden Gate Bridge stop. And you've got a half an hour at the end here from 6:30 to 7. That's your time back at the warehouse at the end of your tour. And then from 7 to midnight is off-duty again. One thing to note here is that the time at the wineries can be logged as on-duty, not driving, or off-duty. We don't have any strong policy on this particular tour. Really, the Yosemite tour is the only tour where you come anywhere close to the time limits, the 10-hour drive time and the 15-hour total on-duty time. So on this tour, you're not really ever at risk of getting over time. So how you log is really essentially up to you. In this case, all the wineries were considered on-duty, not driving time, which is fine. Your lunch break is off-duty. Your Muir Woods time is off-duty, so you're just fine doing it that way. The way I personally log on the Woods and Wine Tour is the 1-hour winery stop at Klein at the end of the day. I will usually log as on-duty, not driving, but the other two wineries I will usually log as off-duty time. Again, doesn't really matter in the end. So then you've got your totals over here, 14.5 hours of off-duty time. You're totaled out at 5 hours of drive time and 4.5 hours of on-duty time for a total of 24. Up in the recap in the top right corner, you've got 9.5 hours of on-duty time, combining number 3 and number 4, driving and on-duty time. Your passenger number of 32, never forget that. And then we've got, again, the breakdown of where you were at each of these times. And you can see how it's done here for San Francisco, then Muir Woods. Again, technically, it's probably more accurate to write Mill Valley, California, but I think we're just writing Muir Woods for a long time. I think we're okay with that. Then Sonoma, California for Gloria Ferrer. Our current winery that we go to first is actually changed and is currently Mayo. That may change again in the future. Then you've got your Sonoma Plaza stop for lunch. You've got your stop in Napa at Madonna. Then you've got your Sonoma stop at Klein Winery, and then heading back to San Francisco. And then down here at the bottom you've got from San Francisco, California. Again, write the whole name of the city out, San Francisco, California. CA can be an abbreviation, you can abbreviate the state. And then to Napa, which is the farthest destination that you got to on the day. And that is your Woods and Wine log sheet. So on this slide, we're just going to show you how to log for days off. So anytime you've been off work, you'll need to reference that in your driver's log, your driver's daily log. As I mentioned previously, you can lump multiple days off together, but for your log to be compliant, there has to be a page for a single or multiple days off between shifts. So here you can see in the date, in this particular case, May 17th and 18th, 2013. If there's 3 days, you could put 17th to the 19th. That would also work. And then filling out the rest as you would have had you been working. In total miles driving and mileage, you just put a line through it. You can plug in days off for the vehicle number. You'll sign it, line through co-driver as you've done with other logs. And then just do a line all the way across on off-duty and just mention in between, as you see here, off 517, 518, or you can Again, you can do off 517 to 519, something like that, and then total up the number of hours you were not working. And then down below, just write days off. And that's it. That's adequate to cover for your days off. That's all you really need to do. Next up is an example of an astronomical tour expense sheet, the accounting sheet we referenced earlier. So you can see how these are done. So this first example is the accounting sheet or expense sheet that would have gone with the first tour that we logged for, the Yosemite tour in bus 1620. Pretty straightforward: date, the tour that you're driving, your name as the driver, and the vehicle number. Up here in the first section, you've got cash advanced. That can be used on occasion. Most common one would be on a Monterey and Carmel tour. Oftentimes the driver will be issued a cash advance because the entry fee to the 17-mile drive is a cash only thing, and so you need cash in advance to do that. There are some other circumstances where you might have been given cash in advance. That's the most common one. Cash collected. So if you were requested to collect some cash from passengers, this is where you'll note that you took that money. Traveler's checks, again, that won't come up too often, but you put them there. And then total cash. So you just total out the cash there. Into the second section here, expenses, please write receipt value. All receipts except wash must be submitted. And you've got the two sections. On the left would be listing of any expenses that came from your personal funds, whether it be your personal credit card or your personal cash. For the most part, we prefer that you use your company credit card as much as possible, which is referenced on the right side in the second section here. But there will be occasions where you'll be using your own funds to incur expenses. Those get logged over here on the left. So then if you were to have any personal expenses, total cash expenses, put the amount in there. And then down below that, where you see cash enclosed and driver reimbursement, what you're going to do is you're going to take the difference between the cash advanced and the total cash expenses, and that would be your cash enclosed. Alternatively, if you spent more than the cash that was advanced, then you'd go down to cash owed to driver today, and that's the amount that you would put in there. So let's think of an example here. If you were given let me start over. Let's say you were going to Monterey and you didn't, for whatever reason, get a cash advance, and so you had to pay $50, which would go under park admission for the 17-mile drive entry. So you would put that here on the left column for park admission under cash or personal expenses, $50, and then down below total cash expenses, $50. Now let's say you had to collect $100 from a passenger on that same day. Your cash enclosed at that point would be the difference. So you would take the $50 that you used for park admission out of your own funds, subtract that from the $100 that you took in, and your cash enclosed would be $50. Another example would be that you had a $50 entry fee to the 17-mile drive. You had no cash to collect, and so $50 of your own funds were used to enter the park, and you require reimbursement. In that case, your total cash expenses would be $50. You'd have $0 on cash enclosed, and then on cash owed to driver today, you'd have a positive balance in your favor of $50. Which then eventually, if any reimbursement that you are owed, will be paid out monthly with reimbursement checks. Excuse me. Um, as you see in this example, this is more of a standard example where there were no personal expenses, and so everything was represented on the right column, which is the company credit card expense column. And again, that's where the bulk of your expenses should go. And you can see 2 entries for gas. This is a Yosemite tour, and so at the moment we still have a reimbursement for food. For the Yosemite tour specifically, every driver that does the Yosemite tour gets a $15 allowance for food that they can put on their credit card. And so this particular tour, the driver had 3 separate purchases of food, which totaled out at $14.14. And then the park admission that was charged to this person's card was $125. And that's pretty much it. And you want to have a receipt for each of these line items. If you don't have a receipt and you don't turn in a receipt, that becomes very challenging for the accounting department to track all our charges. So make sure to keep and turn in all your receipts consistently. If the accountant finds that you're not turning in receipts regularly, you'll get notified, and so try not to do that. And that's that for this one. Alright, this is the final slide in this section, and this is another example of an expense sheet. This one would be the expense sheet for the second tour that we were logging as an example. So this is a Muir Woods and Wine Country tour, and again, same thing. You've got the date, name of the tour, name of yourself, the driver, and the vehicle number. In this case, the driver had $85 to collect from a passenger, which this driver did. So you can see that the $85 is placed in the cash collected section up here at the top. And then the total cash is $85. And this is interesting. This is an older example where the cash carried forward. You won't see that anymore. This is kind of an antiquated system. So we don't actually have that section cash carried forward anymore. But anyway, $85 total cash. Had this driver been issued a $100 cash advance for anything, then the total cash would be $185. So in this example, $85. If you go down the left column here, the cash and personal credit card expenses. This driver washed their van, spent $15 doing so. This is another thing that doesn't come up very much anymore. We used to do this in the past. We do most of our vehicle washing at the warehouse now, but does provide an example for this driver having some personal expenses of $15. And interestingly enough, in this example, they didn't complete the lowest section. So I'm just going to explain to you what would have happened here. So driver collected $85 from a passenger. So his or her total cash was $85. Had $15 out of pocket expense that he or she spent for washing the vehicle. So total cash and personal expenses, $15. In this case, the cash enclosed would have been $70. So the $85 that this person collected, less the $15 personal expenses, the balance is what they turn in at $70. And then over here, just a gas charge in this case that was placed on the credit card. You'll notice this section down to the right, passenger wine purchases. This applies specifically to the Muir Woods and Wine Country tour. We try to keep track of how much wine our passengers buy at each of the wineries as accurately as we can. This allows us to get a sense for how much business we're bringing each of these wineries, so that when we contract with them, we can give them a sense for what we offer them, the value of our business. So as best you can, try to get a sense for how much wine is being sold at each winery purchased by our passengers. You don't necessarily need to be drilling your passengers on what they bought, but If you're just keeping your eyes open, you can kind of see, get a sense for who bought what, where, and even if you ask the wineries before you leave, you can say how much wine did you sell. They'll give you the number. Plug that in there. That allows us to keep the estimates going. And that, I believe, is it for this example and this section. I can't think of anything else. If you do have questions about logging, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, logging accurately and doing accurate expense sheets is of the utmost importance so that we can keep our records and correctly, and most importantly, so we can stay in compliance for our CHP inspections. So if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to be in touch with the operations manager or accounting department. And thank you.